Welcome. This is Discussion with Nico. Today we have a very special guest, Mr. Charles Bailey, who happens to be the headmaster slash principal of my school here at Worksop College. So, Mr. Bailey, thank you so much for agreeing the podcast.
No,
I
thank you.
hope,
Thank you for having me.
Yes, and I hope we have a very interesting discussion ahead. So, let's begin. What inspired you to become headmaster of Worksop College?
A good question, and it might make sense for me to start why I wanted to go into teaching. So when I was about 13, 14, I knew I wanted to be a teacher. That's quite an unusual thing to aspire to be when you're 13, 14. And actually I can remember quite vividly some of my friends at the time thinking it was quite amusing that I wanted to become a teacher. But I knew I wanted to be a teacher. I knew I probably wanted to teach at some point in a boarding school. So I went to an all-boys boarding school myself. By the time I got to university, I decided I wanted to teach in the state sector. I trained in the state sector. But then I realised that actually probably some of my strengths lay in coaching sport as well as teaching in the classroom. And the independent sector allowed me to pursue that. So I started teaching in an independent school in North East London. It was a diamond structure school, so boys and girls taught in separate classrooms, but they socialised together. And then from there, I went in 2014 to an all-boys boarding school in North London, and I've spent the last 11 years there in various different management roles. And the inspiration for becoming a headmaster was I wanted to make a meaningful impact on a community. And the appeal of Worksop, and this was quite clear when I came up for interview, was that it very much is a community. There's a sense that we're all pulling in the same direction, that with a clear strategy and vision, we can achieve some great things. So I remember driving back down the A1 after coming for my interview here and phoning my wife on the way back saying how much I enjoyed the day and hoping that I'd be invited back for the next round of interviews. And that was back in July, about nearly a year ago now. And here I am.
Yes, and it's a really interesting journey, I would say. Well, so staying on the same topic, you're a relatively young headmaster, and what is your vision for the future education of students, not only in schools but maybe in universities? What would you say?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's one where I think my answer probably changes from time to time. I think in the education sector at the moment we are in a state of flux. I think what is clear is that we need to make sure that learning and one's educational journey has a clear bespoke pathway. So for each child who comes to Ranby House or to Worksop or goes up to university, I think it's our duty to create a clear pathway for them to fulfill their own potential. What you don't want to do is homogenize the experience for all learners and say that we create one kind of Worksopian or one kind of Ranbyan. And I think that's the same in broader education, and we are starting to see the sector change in that way. So if we think about higher education, for example, I think it's no longer the case that every child should strive to go to university or strive for a certain kind of job. Actually, they should be choosing what's right for them. But I think we have a bit of catching up to do in terms of the education world in that regard. And I think there's probably an education piece for teachers and for parents there as well, to say that actually success can look like a number of different things for different pupils. It doesn't always have to be straight nines or straight A stars, although that might be success for some. In fact, improving one's emotional intelligence or collaborative intelligences might be better.
Yes, and I agree that today in the modern world, the meaning of success has changed. I mean, maybe 20, 30 years ago, it was like, okay, you have to get the best grades, you have to get into the best uni. If you have a diploma from there, you're successful. But today, it's all different. It's not where you go to uni or how you do in school, but what you do outside of it. If you're passionate, let's say, about singing, you might go to a singing club, you might start your own club. And this is what success has become, enjoying your passions and doing what you love, in my opinion. And this is a really positive direction, in my opinion. However, I think there is still some more progress that could be made, not only in the UK, but I think in the entire world.
I agree with
And
that. I think on that it's about focusing on character. So actually, parents who prospective parents who come up to Worksop and want to think about a place for their child at the school, they have asked me, on what basis are you selecting children at the interview stage? And I explained to them that we're not just looking at academics, we are looking at character and potential, specifically potential to take advantage of the opportunities that are in a place like this. And so I think character is something that employers and universities are going to be looking at more.
yeah, and I think this is the direction that they're going to. I know that the selecting process for students in universities is different in the UK and USA, but I know that in the USA, someone might have a perfect SAT score and perfect grades and amazing activities, but when they're interviewed, if the interviewer thinks that this guy is too arrogant, this guy, he's not going to be a good friend of pupils, they're not going to let him in the school, in the college, because they care more about your character than what your grades are. And I think it's similar in the UK. I'm not really sure how it is, but I know that there is an interview process and similar things happen. Going back to students, so should students have more freedom to change stuff in their school communities? Because back then it used to be that there's a given set of rules, students have to obey them no matter what. But today there's stuff like student councils, student parliaments who discuss issues and try to find solutions with other fellow students and maybe with their teachers. What would you say about that?
Yeah, 100%. So I completely agree with you on that. We need to focus on pupil voice and view you as the pupils as the experts on education. Now, with the best will in the world, I'm not experiencing lessons on a day-to-day basis. My colleagues might be teaching one particular subject, but they're not having the same experience that the pupils, are having. So I think we as staff need to view the pupils as experts on education just because of the exposure that you have. Of course, the views need to be well informed and based on sort of hard facts and data. And sometimes I might hear people say, oh, this is rubbish, or we need to improve that. And I think that's where, as teaching staff, we need to just drill down a bit further and say, well, on what basis are you making that judgment? And as you say, I think having student councils, having committees where pupils are leading those groups and leading initiatives, that's the right forum to share those ideas. And the boys and girls who are sitting on those committees, they should seek to be the spokespeople for their respective groups. So for their boarding house or for their year group. And I think that's the best way to funnel through the information to staff. But I'll give you an example. So last year at my previous school, I put in place our study leave arrangements, and the upper sixth weren't very happy with the study leave arrangements. Effectively, I was keen to keep them in school for as long as possible. And instead of them just kind of bemoaning the fact that my study leave arrangements weren't what they liked, they met with me. We had a good conversation. We talked about how we might want to adjust the study leave arrangements, and we did that. And that was quite a powerful thing for the school community to have seen, because it was a good example of where pupil voice actually had a real impact.
It did, yeah, and it is, in my opinion, really important that pupils get this, get their voices heard, because yes, well, the teachers might be super competent, they might be very educated, they might, be the best teachers in the world. They're still not. They experienced school a different time, during a different time period, and I think student councils and student parliaments are really the best way where students should get their voices heard. And it's really important. School leadership is really important, where let's say the headmaster might be or should be a really friendly person, where a student will not worry about something that they don't like. They'll just go to the headmaster or different member of staff and talk to them about it. And I think this is really important, and this change that is happening in the education system worldwide is really positive. I mean, it's giving students more freedom, and it's giving them leadership skills, because this is something that they'll have to do outside of school, maybe at their jobs. They might have to go up to their managers, their supervisors, and say, I don't like this. I think this needs to change. And I think this is a really positive thing.
And again, it's about preparing young people for the world of work. A few years ago in 2019, I visited the offices of Google and Facebook because we were looking at our curriculum then, and we were thinking about what skills do we need to provide young people to be successful, particularly in tech, but not exclusively so. And I remember vividly Google saying, it doesn't matter what degree you have. It needs to be a good degree, and ideally you go to a good university. But actually what really matters is your ability to work with others and your ability to manage projects. So being a project manager, identifying people's respective strengths and working alongside them. And that really resonated with me. I think that's a really important message.
Yeah, Google is a really good example because I know that they have this interview question where they'll give you a jar and a ping pong ball and say, how many ping pong balls can fit in this jar?
Right.
And they're not looking for you to answer the question like, okay, 2,000 will fit in it exactly. They're looking how you approach the problem.
Yeah.
And this is something that's really important,
Yeah.
in my opinion. Let's go back to current pupils. So the new generation is working much harder, and they're taking care of themselves. They don't smoke as much. They don't drink alcohol that much. I mean, yeah, this is something that happens everywhere, and there's always going to be a few that do it. But according to statistics, it's much lower in this generation than it was in the previous generation. Why do you think this is the reason? I mean, is there like a high competition between young people for maybe the best jobs and the best spots at universities?
It's a really great observation, and I agree with you. But I think actually, as a population, particularly in this country, we are more aware of what is good and what is bad for us. I think the phrase that's used is biohacking. So we're always looking for new ways to make our lives better, and a lot of that comes down to health, our physical, but perhaps more importantly, our mental health as well. And I think young people are at the vanguard in that regard. And I think technology has made a big difference there. I'm afraid I'm a bit of a sucker for this. I love all this kind of thing. I could bore you to death on all of it, but thinking about our levels of productivity, you mentioned competition. Well, how can a young person get a bit of an edge over the next person? And it might be to do with their sleep patterns. It might be to do with their morning routines. It might be to do with what they're eating and drinking. You mentioned alcohol, smoking. 20 years ago, the younger generation would have been much more interested in that part of the world, but that no longer seems to be an area of interest. And I think it's because people want to make sure that they're functioning to their full potential at all times. Because if you function at your full potential, then you can be successful. Yeah. And you're right, it is competitive, and I think the press plays a part in this. It doesn't go a day doesn't go by, so you open up the newspaper and it might say, well, there are fewer jobs, fewer graduate opportunities than there ever have been before. Some of that I don't think is necessarily statistically true, but I think the messaging that comes through to young people is, gosh, I've really got to be at the top of my class, otherwise I'm not going to be able to achieve. I think all of it needs to be tempered in also, managing the pressure one puts on oneself. Again, I think I'm definitely guilty of this. I think because of social media and because we see people who we might think are quite aspirational in this space when it comes to taking care of yourself and working hard, it can create some quite toxic work and education behaviors. The person who online says they wake up at 4:30 a.m. every day and they meditate for half an hour and then they go for a 10K run. Are they actually doing that every day, or are they only doing it for social media followers? Yeah. And there's an education piece around that for young people and for adults to just recognize what is realistic.
I think you're absolutely right. Social media has, created this competition between students. They're trying to be the best versions of themselves, which in my opinion is really good. I mean, you need to always try and find ways to improve. However, it could turn into an unhealthy competition where, let's say, really good friends might backstab each other to get the better grades. They might say, well, prepare for this in the exam, when they know that topic is not going to come up.
Yeah.
And I think that we need to find some kind of balance in between them, where there should be healthy competition of students trying to be the best versions of themselves. However, being the best version of yourself means that you help others as well.
Yeah.
So you shouldn't tell the student the wrong information just so you make sure you get a higher grade than him. You should help him so he gets a high grade as high grade as you.
Yeah. And there's something called toxic productivity.
Yeah.
You come across this. So people constantly trying to make it look like they're doing lots of things because that looks impressive. But actually, we want to focus on meaningful output, not just looking like you're working hard all the time.
That's absolutely right.
And there is a negative culture in the workplace, but also in schools of, are you the last person in the library? And actually having self-awareness and knowing what makes you tick and how you work best. The way that you work best might be different to the next person. And it's about recognizing what working patterns work.
That's absolutely right. Individualism is really important in this case, because let's say some student might go into the library for 5 hours and do some homework, maybe do some studying, but they're not very effective in the library and might be effective, let's say, outside, but they go into the library to show others that they're so hardworking. And in my opinion, this is a bit wrong.
Yeah.
And I'll go back to what I said. We need to find some kind of balance between it. Now, I want to ask you something about the educational system, primarily the school educational system. Many people say that the school system that we have today, not only in the United Kingdom, but everywhere in the world, is outdated and hasn't been majorly changed in the last 100 years. And they say that it's not as effective. What do you think? What's your position on this?
There are lots of strengths of the British education system. And I think it's a point of pride that it remains the case that British education continues to be a big export to other nations. And it's great that we have international pupils coming over here. And that's the same for the university sector as well. But I think we do need to evolve. You're completely right. If you were to look 100 years ago at what a school timetable might look like, it would look quite similar to ours today. It might have a bit more divinity, theology in it. It might have a bit more CCF, but beyond that, very similar to ours today. So I suppose the question is, how could we move away from having siloed subjects within our timetable and instead work on projects? And at Worksop, we are doing some work in that regard with our younger pupils. They'll work on projects for a period of time instead of working on individual pieces of work each day. The London Interdisciplinary School, which is a new university established a few years ago, is a good example of this. So they're a new university. Instead of going up to university and studying geography or physics, you study problems, real world problems, and those problems might change. So over the years, they've looked at knife crime in London, they've looked at antibiotic resistance, and they'll say to their undergraduates, right, this is your problem, use your experience and your knowledge of your different academic disciplines and try to solve that problem. And I think that's a really compelling model. It's not for everyone, but it's compelling because that's exactly what it's going to be like in the world of work. It's exactly what life is like. Life isn't like going from a history lesson to a maths lesson to a chemistry lesson. Now, that's not to say that there isn't some value in gaining knowledge. And I think we should guard against just focusing on problems. You need knowledge in order to grip problems. And maybe school is the place for that rigor. But focusing on problem solving is probably one thing to consider. I think our exam system as well is something that hasn't really changed over the years. There were public exam reforms nearly a decade ago, but the reforms have never been truly significant. So I wonder whether in the future we might move to a situation where pupils are required to give vivas, so kind of an oral discussion on what they're studying instead of it all being handwritten. Perhaps we might move away from handwriting altogether and just use devices. That scares me a bit because I think there's a lot of value in handwriting and the creative process involved in handwriting. So looking at reforming the exam system perhaps. And then a challenge for this country and actually for the globe is how can we continue to recruit really good teachers. For disappointing reasons, I think the teaching profession isn't always respected in this country in the way that it should be. So, I think collectively we can do some work on that and make sure that teachers feel valued. I think also we're going to see a system where teachers more frequently can teach across disciplines. So they're not just here to teach one subject. And again, the higher education sector and the US sector with liberal arts degrees and that kind of thing lends itself to creating teachers who can teach across different disciplines?
I would say you're absolutely right. I mean, teachers need to be more respected. I mean, compared to what's happening in Georgia right now, teachers there, the really good teachers don't want to stay and tend to move to countries like the United Kingdom to teach because they're simply not valued. And this is a horrible problem. And I think the UK and Western countries are much more ahead in this compared to countries like mine. But however, I think it all comes down to the same one thing, individualism. I would say that yes, the UK school system is really good with the A level system. So for those who don't know, in the A level system, you pick three subjects mostly and you study them in depth. Like right now I'm studying history, geography, and economics, and I absolutely love it. It's really interesting. And I'm glad that I don't have to study subjects that, I'm not that interested in. For example, in school, I wasn't really interested in chemistry. I never found it interesting, but I still had to study it. I still had to prepare for exams. But coming here gave me the opportunity to study the things that I love. Yes, sometimes you have to study and do things that you don't want for success, but I think giving students the freedom to choose what they want to study is absolutely amazing. And in my opinion, it all comes down to the same thing when we look at the education system, individualism. People evolve differently, people think differently, and giving everyone the same curriculum, it's not really right in my opinion, because let's say when you're in a lesson, this one student might find it very interesting, one student might find it boring, and he might not be very attentive, and this student might be frowned upon because, oh look, he's not paying attention, he's a bad student. But in my opinion, there's no such thing as a bad student, only like a bad system. And I think the UK is really ahead in this, actually. I think it's the most ahead in the world when it comes to, individualism and learning what you want. But I think there can be some progress made by giving schools more autonomy, giving schools more choice, because there's this argument saying that parents and students should have the right to choose what kind of system and what kind of education they want to get. However, the problem with this is some schools might, be a bit fraudulent when it comes to grading. So I think the A-level system does maintain the balance. But when it comes to other countries, like in my country, you have to learn 9 subjects up until you finish school.
Yeah.
And students simply hate it. Like I don't know a single person who loved the system we were doing, because it's built on general knowledge, but at the end of school you don't really know anything meaningful. While here you pick 3 subjects, and at the end of school, you have meaningful knowledge and experience in that field. And I think this is really good, and this is why the UK is one of the best when it comes to education.
I think we do need to guard against, though, I completely agree with you, but I think we need to guard against viewing education in transactional terms. So you do your GCSEs, you do your A-levels, you get a grade in return. Something that we're going to be looking at Worksop for next year is introducing a super curriculum. So academic enrichment and learning for its own sake. So signing up for different courses that might be running at the college, just because you are interested in those things and because the teachers who are teaching you, those are areas of interest for them. And trying to create a culture of lifelong learning. Because, going back to one of your earlier questions about the future of education, education should all be about creating learners for the future. Learning doesn't stop as soon as you leave school or university.
That's absolutely true. I heard this quote once, you only grow old when you stop learning.
Oh, okay.
It was on a poster in my old school. I just don't remember who said it.
Yeah,
it's just like
I
it's
like
in
that.
my head.
Okay, that's good.
So now let's switch over the topic. So I want to ask you this question: a book / movie / TV series that you think every student our age should read or watch?
That's such a difficult question. It's actually ahead of this. I was kind of thinking about it, and it was the one question that I struggled with. I think I'd preface this by saying that reading is a huge passion of mine. I think it's probably one of my main interests. I like consuming content. I like reading. I like watching films. I would say that I've noticed that young people seem to read or watch something alongside having access to another screen, like sort of dual screening.
Dual screening, yeah.
And I'd encourage anyone who's listening to this to give yourself the time to just focus on one thing and see how much you can enjoy it. I can tell you what I last read. It's probably the best thing, but it's relevant to education to a certain extent. So I read Demon Copperhead. Came out last year, I think, and it tells the story of a young person in Appalachia, so kind of Midwest Kentucky region of the United States, who's born into a difficult family circumstance. And it tracks his life, and the reason it resonated with me is you can see, how much of someone's future or someone's destiny, to a certain extent, is informed by the experiences they have when they're young, whether it's their schooling experiences, their upbringing, their family situation. And it was a story that left me with a weight of responsibility, I think, in my role here at Worksop, because the influence that we have on young people is significant, and you only get one shot to make a difference to a young person's life. And similarly, parents, when they're choosing a school for their children, it is probably the most important decision that they'll make. So that was something that I thought about. But from a pupil point of view, it's a good story to read because it's a kind of coming of age story, but it's got some pretty hard hitting themes as well. From a film point of view, I was just thinking what I really enjoyed. And I was thinking when I was at school, which films came out that had a big effect on me. And it was probably the Lord of the Rings films, just because I never read the Lord of the Rings trilogy before seeing the films. I saw the films and it opened my eyes up to this world, Tolkien's sort of fantasy world, and that's been a real sort of passion since then. So if young people who are listening haven't seen them, I'd recommend that they watch those 3 films.
Yeah. Well, my answer would be a bit different. So I watched Adolescence, and it was like a big, it was really popular a few months ago. And when I was watching it, like my family were saying, "Oh, you have to watch it. It's amazing." I thought, okay, it's probably nothing. But when I watched it, I think every young student should watch it because it talks about the psychology of young people, coming of age, like lying maybe, because the movie is about this kid who, killed his classmate because of the internet, really, because of these trends, because of social media. And it's one negative part about social media, which is cyberbullying. It's often overlooked. Like many will just say, just turn your computer off or turn your phone off, and that's it. But it's different with this generation, in my opinion. And I think absolutely everyone should watch that TV series. It's really hard for me to describe it without someone watching it because it's just one long shot. That's how it's filmed. Yeah. And when it comes to a book, I have something really interesting. It's a book called Narcissism and Power, which looks at the psychology of like world leaders such as Napoleon. And there's this part that I remember really well from this book, talking about time when Napoleon took the emperor's crown, which the Pope was supposed to put on his head, but he put on his head in front of the Pope. And what he was thinking about was, I'm the emperor now. I made it. You have no power over me, and I plan to take over the world. Like, what was going through his mind was really interesting, and I think everybody should read that book.
I think with the thing that struck me about adolescence was the polarizing effect of social media and the parents' responsibilities for just keeping a very close watch on what is being consumed by young people, and how that online consumption of material can have devastating knock-on effects. I think overall, I mentioned I love reading. I think we shouldn't be snobs about reading as well. So I often say to people whom I've taught in the past, just find whatever it is that you really enjoy doing. It might be a thriller that you pick up in the airport and you just really love it, but just reading more, I think, is something that we can all focus on.
Yeah, and the thing is, sometimes they might say, "Oh, you need to read literature and these conventional authors, or it doesn't count." And I totally disagree with it. It's the 21st century. Yes, these old classic novelists like Charles Dickens and Shakespeare, yes, they're really old. They tell a lot of history, but at the same time, students and people should have the freedom to choose what they want to read.
Yeah.
Yes, some people are interested in these classic novels, but some might be interested in, let's say, comic books.
Yeah.
And I think this is the direction that the world is going to right now. So usually this is the part of the podcast where I ask someone, where do you see the country of Georgia in 10 years? But since we're not in Georgia, I decided to do something interesting. So I
Yeah.
asked ChatGPT,
Okay.
what question would you give Mr. Charles Bailey, the headmaster of Worksop College? And this is the question that it came up with. If you could add one completely unconventional subject to the school curriculum, something like philosophy through Star Wars or how to survive a zombie apocalypse, what would it be and why? It's a really difficult question. I've been thinking about it for a long time and I still can't.
So what subject would I introduce? Well, I've kind of got a bit of experience with this. So a few years ago, I was asked to put on like an elective course on anything that I found interesting. So I put on a course that was to do with philosophy and spirituality through the music of Cat Stevens. I don't know if you know who Cat Stevens is, but
haven't heard of it, unfortunately.
Cat Stevens in the 1960s, 1970s was probably one of the world's most famous singer-songwriters. He had quite an interesting history. So by the end of the 1970s, right at the height of his stardom, he decided to step away from music and convert to Islam. And he changed his name and committed himself to Islam. So I would teach this course, and I have taught this course, 8 lessons looking at spirituality, Islam and philosophy through the lens of popular music in the 1960s, 1970s, specifically looking at the contribution of Cat Stevens.
Wow, and it's really interesting. I mean, so I unfortunately haven't heard about this person.
You need to listen to it. It's
I'll
very
listen
good.
to his music and I'll have a read about him after the podcast. And so the way that he chose, so converting to Islam, and like, oh, it sounds very interesting actually, like especially the philosophical part of it. Wow.
So so the story goes, he was swimming off the coast of Malibu, and there was a significant current, and he felt like he was going to drown. And he said to himself in that moment, "If I'm saved, then I'll commit myself to God." And his brother had previously given him a copy of the Quran, and he had started reading it, and so he completely turned his back on music. And as I said, it was at the height of his stardom, making a huge amount of money, very, very successful, selling out big concert venues. And he just converted to Islam and then didn't pick up a guitar again, I think, until the mid-2000s. So he had a sort of 30-year hiatus before coming back to popular music.
It's really interesting, you know. I'm like really interested now. I'm definitely gonna give it a read after our podcast, and I recommend that everyone do the same. So, yeah, I mean, the journey and what probably went through his mind is really important at the time.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
but
I think, you know, that question of what you should, bringing something else into the curriculum is a great one. I think sometimes using storytelling to get some ideas across, whether that be through anecdote or through the example of individuals, it's a good way to capture people's imagination and not just think about concepts in isolation. You mentioned zombie apocalypse. I love the Last of Us video games. Have you ever played them?
I have.
Okay, so obviously TV programs out at the moment as well. But again, looking at storytelling through video games, I think is quite an interesting concept. I think we often think about video games as just a way of enjoying and unwinding and that kind of thing, just a bit of fun. But actually, some of the storytelling is phenomenal. Yeah.
I mean, this is something that the world is moving towards. Some video games today, I mean, a few years ago they might have been seen as this distraction from everything, but now it's seen as a form of art sometimes.
Definitely.
Because the amount of effort that it takes to make even one of those games is incredible. It takes years to develop one. It's like a movie you could say, or a book. Well, yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting perspective. I'll definitely give a read about it. Now let's move on to our final question of the podcast. So, what advice would you give to students leaving school and education?
Quite simple. I think be open-minded, be happy to meet new people, try different things. So when you are 18, if you leave school, or when you're 21, when you leave university, or even into adulthood, you're never the finished article. So don't just stay in your lane and focus on the things that you're good at. Try things that push you outside of your comfort zone. I think that'd be my message.
I think I saw this quote on another poster, and it was, don't think outside the box, think like there is no box.
Nice, like it.
And
very good.
Yeah, so this is the advice I would give. I mean, I'm finishing school next year, and this is the advice I'd like to give to myself and everyone watching our podcast today is don't think that there's like a box that contains you and you need to think outside of it. Think that there is no box.
Yeah.
The world is all yours. You're young. It's the world. You're the next generation that will lead the world. So just try everything. Experience new things. If you want to take a gap year, take a gap year. Travel the world, see different cultures, because the future is yours.
Mm-hmm.
It belongs to you, and it belongs to the new generation, in my opinion. And this is always the case, no matter what time period we're in. And yeah, this is the advice I'd give: be open-minded. Think like there's no box, and yeah,
It's
the
a
future
bit
is
of
yours.
advice. My wife last year said to me to think about coming from a place of yes. When new opportunities arise, come from a place of yes instead of just thinking, oh no, that's not for me. And then you can surprise yourself. So yeah, some good advice, I think. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for doing this podcast.
Thank you, Nico. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.